Diversity, equity, and inclusion training. What the heck is that? You've seen it in the news. Maybe you've seen it at your company. With me today, folks, is Coach Dee Nelson. I know you said you do more than coaching, Dee, but I love that. I call you Coach Dee. And folks, I was wondering, and I've had Dee on the show a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to ask you to go back if you want to see more about her and her book that she recently wrote. It was just a fascinating interview. And I wanted to have her back on the show today because she does DE&I training. And I'm like, Dee, I would love to have you on the show to talk about what that is. Absolutely. You know, I do harassment training and I do things with EEO and EEOC, but I don't do that. And I know it's been in the news. So I think I would like to know more about it. And some of our listeners and some of our viewers would too. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome Coach Dee Nelson.
Thank you. Thank you. I realize that Coach Dee doesn't have her glasses, but we will make it work because I don't have to read anything.
No, we're this unscripted. We're just going to go right at it. I've got some questions. You've got answers.
Sure.
But before we do that, could you just tell our viewers and our listeners just briefly a little bit about, refresh our memories. Who are you and what you're all about?
Sure. My name is Dee Nelson Streete. I also go by Dee, Coach Dee. I'm the president of Authentic Culture and Engagement Solutions, which is a consulting firm that's focused on really helping people navigate their culture through an inclusive lens. So a lot of what I do is the DEI that we're talking about, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, a lot of cultural audits, unconscious bias training, inclusive leadership, the whole nine. And we'll get into that a little bit more. I've been doing it for myself for a couple of years. I started in 2018. Prior to that, I led diversity and inclusion for Charles Schwab and had my hands in diversity and inclusion at Walt Disney World and other companies. So I'm really excited that we're having this conversation because a lot of people don't know what it is, but they're afraid to ask. And, you know, as trainers, we always say there's no dumb thing is a dumb question, and it's not. But I'm glad we're going to have an opportunity to clarify it for your audience. So I appreciate you being here.
No, this is great stuff. So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, what is all involved? And I'm just going to let you go. Tell me more about that. You see, I've never taught it. I've not actually even been through a DE&I class. I've read a lot about it.
Sure.
But tell me about, I guess, those three words, and how do you explain it to folks? And what would I experience if I went to a DE&I training?
Okay. So I think historically, if you think about it, I think some of it stemmed from what you are familiar with, which is the EEO, right? The equal employment opportunity, the non-discrimination against women or against minorities or against religion, all of those things. So I think what happened is employee relations, which I also have a background in, can be seen as a little more punitive, right? You discriminated against somebody, or you didn't hire this person, or they're working in a hostile environment. And so then we're looking at what is the appropriate action, whether it's termination, training, whatever. I think probably about 25 years ago, I think his name was William Roosevelt, realized, you know what, we're missing a piece. So instead of just being punitive and saying, well, if you do this, you'll get fired. If you do this, you'll get demoted. Why don't we figure out how to embrace the differences? And so when you think about diversity is really about the differences. And there are plenty of dimensions of diversities. The one that most of us are most think about the most is race, sex, religion. Some of it are things you can see. And what was happening is it was becoming more and more necessary because the diversity and the demographics in the United States were shifting. And, you know, people started saying by 2020 or by 2000, America was going to become more brown. You know what I mean? That we'll have more African Americans, more Hispanics. And in the traditional sense, it won't just be white males in charge of everything, because demographics are stating that the numbers of people in the workforce are changing. And with that change, we need to have more knowledge and understanding. So diversity is really, people say, there's a saying that says diversity is about counting numbers, inclusion is about making numbers count. So diversity is truly just about having representation, right? You have different representation in your workforce. So you have Hispanics, you have African Americans, you have whites, you have Asians, you have people with disabilities. That is diversity. So you don't have a monolithic workforce. So that's all diversity is. Inclusion is about, I'm here now, great, but do I have a voice? I did a training called Valuing All Voices. So even though now I'm here, do I get to bring my whole self to work? If I'm in a meeting and I say, oh, I have this idea, is everybody talking over me? Or does somebody say, oh, Dee has an idea, and they listen to the idea in the same way? So inclusion is more about, now that we have this diversity, how do we ensure that they're included in the decision-making, included in everything that we do? Because what happens at a lot of companies, and it's not that unusual, is there's a lot of diversity at the entry level, right? But as the company grows and as people do become promoted, it becomes more white and more male as it goes up. There's a lot of studies of women in the workplace is one of them. And so it talks about how, you know, the entry level in a lot of cases is 50-50, or it may be 20% of African American or 15% Hispanic, but the conversion is not nearly the same. So what inclusion is about is understanding how to include folk. And then also, I'm gonna go back a little bit. The premise of diversity, it's not just the right thing to do, or we're not doing this just so we don't get sued, or because we have to do EEO, or we have a EEO or affirmative action plan. It's because the studies have shown us that we will have better outcomes if we have more diversity. So there are studies that say companies that have racial diversity are 35% more profitable. Companies that have gender diversity are 15% more profitable. Because what they're realizing is if everybody is kind of looking and thinking the same, it's quicker. So you come up with consensus quicker, but you're missing certain angles. So I'll give you an example, even from a cultural perspective of, there was a study, one of the things that sometimes people do in training is they say, draw me a picture of yourself. So people draw pictures of themselves. People more from the Asian culture draw a picture of themselves, but they also draw like maybe the house and people around them. Americans just draw that selfie. Well, culturally, other countries, especially Asian countries, are more interdependent, right? It's all about my family, where I'm from, the land, it's everything. Whereas in America, hey, it's all about me. So it's just my selfie. So even that thought process, if you think about doing a project and how you want something to appear, it really makes a difference who you're marketing to, because everybody doesn't think the same. And there are some cultural nuances that make a difference. So diversity is really about understanding and having representation of different backgrounds and different styles, LGBTQ, the whole nine. But inclusion is, now that we have that, can we make room at the table to make sure they're really not just window dressing, or they're not tokens, or they're just not here to meet quotas, that they really get to come and contribute.
Okay, love that.
So that's D&I.
That really paints a great picture,
Okay.
especially the selfie picture, because you're right. Diversity is more than just, oh, we need to fill certain slots with certain people just so we look good.
Right.
But once you understand diversity, you understand how people view different things. And so if I'm on a team of people, or I'm hiring a number of people, and culturally, I view my life and draw a self-portrait. I view culturally, maybe I draw a picture of myself, but a different type of perhaps race, different culture might then draw a picture of themselves and their family.
Absolutely.
I thought that's pretty
yeah, the context is different.
Yeah, that puts things in context. I always talk about putting things in context. So diversity, and then the inclusion is once you're here, and I could see that. I could see companies, and I don't know if I see it in like shows, or I think about that one movie with those three ladies that were in the space program.
Okay.
And
Oh yeah, Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures, right?
Mhm.
And I think there's, it's like, oh, you know what, you've been assigned and we just need you to go down there and do your job.
Right.
And every time she would have an idea, right? And she was
Mhm.
a Black female, right?
Right.
And so she would come up with an idea, and this is in the 1960s, they would basically ignore her,
Right.
right? She was just window dressing. So
Exactly.
it's more than just being there. It's now that you're here. What do we, okay, I like that.
Okay.
Um, Thank you for that explanation.
Sure.
But where does the E come from? Because I can remember it was always diversity and inclusion training.
Mhm.
Diversity. Then someone said DEI training, and I was like, what is DEI? And then I realized now they've put an
Right.
E
Yeah. The
there
E
too.
is for equity. And I'll be honest, I think we're still evolving. So I would say E is for equity and evolving. Equity is, am I being paid equitably? Am I getting equitable opportunities, right? Because just being there and now including me, if I am not being paid equitably, and there's a lot of studies about, they have equal pay day. So when they
Mhm.
say equal pay day, of white women's equal pay day comes first, then Black women's equal pay day comes next, and then Hispanic equal pay day comes even after. So there's definitely disparity in pay based on not just being a woman, but being a woman of color. So that's equity. But another thing about equity is equity and equal is not necessarily the same thing.
Okay.
So there is a graphic, and I'll try to paint the picture because we're here. I wish I had it, but there's a picture. There's a baseball field, and there's a gate. Let's just say there's a 6-foot fence in front of the gate. So there's a picture that says equity and it says equal. So there's a gentleman who is like 6 feet, and he's standing there looking over the gate, watching the game. Then there's a really short person, but he's standing on a box. So let's just say he's 4 feet, but he's standing on a 2.5-foot box. So he can actually watch the game. And then the third person has something that it puts them at the same level. That's equity. Equal would say everybody stand on their own 2 feet. Well, great for the 6-foot guy, but the other two people are not going to see a damn thing but the fence, right? So equity is about giving people what they need, but it's not about giving people the same exact thing. So that's where equity comes from. And it's pay, but it's also maybe creating a pipeline, right? So maybe if someone is from an underserved community and they're not familiar with financial services, because I deal
Mhm.
with financial services a lot, and they say, oh, we need more diversity in financial services. Well, a lot of people that are in financial services make money based on contacts, right? And I
Right.
mean, known that, it may change in 20, 30 years, but right now, today, the wealth is not in the minority communities. So if I'm going to be successful based on my contacts, then you're going to say, oh, I'm equal. You bring in your book of business. Well, hell, I don't know a lot of people that are million and billionaires. So I'm going to fail. So equity could be, in my case, helping me to build that. Or maybe it's creating a pipeline. So now maybe you have some HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, where you create a financial planning school. Or maybe there's an internship that XYZ company creates in this community so they can start exposing that community to some of these opportunities so they will have more of an opportunity. But that's equity because it's not
Okay.
equal, it's
No,
equitable.
I
Does that make
love,
sense?
once again, another great visual and
Okay.
explanation
Okay.
from you. So thank you. So you mentioned, and I want to ask about the bias, what did you call it?
Unconscious bias.
Unconscious bias.
Mhm.
But can you just walk us through what happens in a diversity and inclusion class? Like, what are the
Sure.
basics when I walk in and
Mhm.
I'm like, why am I here? I've been to harassment training
Right.
already.
Right. Yeah, it's different. It depends on which one you go to. So I do something called unintended consequences, which is very much like unconscious bias. And it's really level setting and getting everybody to understand that we are all biased. Newsflash, because people love to say, I'm colorblind. I don't see color. Wrong answer, right? And it's not because it's not the PC things to say, it's because it's not true.
Mhm.
Studies say the things people notice first about people are their race, their sex, and their appearance, right? So saying you're colorblind, I understand what people are trying to say, that the color, it doesn't matter. but it actually does, because if you don't see my color, you don't see me. And some of my experiences that are different from yours, I have because of my color, right? Where I live, a lot of different things. So unconscious bias is really about getting people to understand we all have biases and they don't have to be intentional. There's a really good book called White Fragility. And I do think one of the things that happens negatively is people think bias bad, unbiased good, of talking about race bad, acting like we're all the same good. And it keeps us from learning, right? Because you have a good person, bad person dichotomy. And as soon as you say racism or racist, everybody's like, no, I'm not. And they don't listen. So bias is better because it helps people realize we all have it and it's not intentional, right? I've done a lot of diversity and inclusion training, but also like you, a lot of EEO investigations. I don't think there are a lot of people running around saying, I'm going to do all this stuff to the Asian people or to the Black people or whatever. It's really more ignorance in that you don't understand certain cultural norms or things that you shouldn't do. And so that's where the unconscious bias comes in, because all bias is it's the way that your brain shortcuts. So when I teach it, I talk about there are millions of pieces of information that come to us at one time. As smart as we are, we cannot digest all of that. So your brain says, okay, I'll be smart, I'll make a shortcut. Okay, so if I've never dealt with the other, whoever the other is, so I've grown up in an all African American community. I went to historically Black college and university. My church is all Black. I've never dealt with a white person, right? So here comes Chuck. Hey, Dee. So because I don't know you and we have a relationship, I got to pull some information about you from somewhere. So where do I pull it? I pull it from what I've seen on the news. I pull it for what I've read in the book, and I pull it for what my mom and dad have told me about white males, right? So that goes into my memory bank. So when I interact with you, all of that comes up, right? If it's complimentary, then great, but it could be wrought with bias. It could be wrought with, only thing I know is I see at the news, I always see white men handcuffed, right? I always see white men described as thugs. So in my mind, white men are dangerous, especially the people who look like me. They're thugs. And so when I interact with you, as nice as you seem, that bias is creeping up. And as if I'm interviewing you, I'm kind of marking you a little lower. I'm doing all this stuff, but it's not conscious. I don't realize that. It's, oh, Chuck seems nice. He's great. So I'm scoring you, but the scores are lower because that unconscious mind is influencing how I see you. And so it happens all the time based on whether you've had experience or relationship. So it's really teaching people that we all have it. Let's figure out what yours is. It's kind of like introspection. And then let's figure out ways to set it aside, as well as dealing with organizational biases, because organizations have bias too. Like certain organizations love extroverts, right? I can say Disney was a company that loved extroverts because it's entertainment, you're forward facing. So what happens to the people that were introverts? Did they have to try harder? Did they get as many promotions? So there's organizational bias as well as personal bias, but the only way to get better is to recognize what yours is and then figure out ways to set it aside.
Yeah. I would imagine that, and someone had sent me a link to a study I was going to check out. I think it was from Harvard. He said that
implicit bias.
And it's different pictures, and you don't have a chance to think. You've got to choose. But bias is more than just, let's say, race. But he said there's a fat skinny test.
Oh, absolutely.
I was like, really?
There's beauty bias. There's height bias. Most CEOs and most presidents are white men over 6 feet. And it's so much so that it's not coincidental. Because think about it, in our society, we're taught that stature shows a certain level of control. So yeah, there's definitely beauty bias, there's height bias, there's name bias. There are all of these studies about names that sound more African American get half of the callbacks with the same exact resume as names that are like Patty, Paul, Sue, or Joe. So that bias it's real.
Okay. So the way you laid out how you teach it, I think that was good, because a lot of people, when they think about, oh, I got to go to a D&I class, they're usually afraid, or they think they're going to go and all they're going to do is sit there and be told how biased they are, how bad they are, and you're doing it where you're saying, no, you
Yeah.
don't understand.
No, we all have it. Yeah,
Mhm.
we all have biases. And I do recommend people go to the Harvard Implicit Bias, because you can take it based on race, you can take it based on sex, different things. And people always hate the results because they're in denial. But you know what? And the thing I teach my class too is, not only are white people biased against black people are biased against black people. We've all been exposed to the same stimulus, right? We have to remember that. If you're watching the news and you see certain things, or if you're reading and you see certain things, we're all being what I call primed. I know Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Blink. And in that book, he talks a lot about priming and kind of influencing thoughts without people realizing that they're being influenced. And so that helps contribute to our bias.
Okay. So this has been great. Let me just ask you, going would a company, I know I do harassment training,
Sure.
right? So this is just doing D&I training. Like, what type of companies are moving forward and doing these trainings? Is it big
Sure.
companies, small companies? Is it, what type of companies have you been working with
Yeah, all
lately?
companies. I'm working with a biochemical company now. I'm working with of a nursing association. I'm working with the financial services firm. All companies are, because they're trying to kind of figure it out, and they know it's bigger than just the EEO, right? Because if you think about it, EEO training and harassment training teaches you what not to do,
Yeah.
but it doesn't teach you how to create an inclusive work environment. So it's all about, like, kind of how you raise your kids. If you always tell them no, you know how kids, their favorite word is no. And it's like, well, mom and dad, how many times have you told them no? EEO training is really about, don't say that, don't do this, don't do that. Diversity and inclusion is about understanding. Guess what? Your company is going to be more profitable if you can bring all the minds and all of the energy and the performance of everybody. You're going to increase your customer base if you can create products that are attractive and that speak to different groups, right? I remember at Disney when they had kind of tapped out in the market as far as just the kind of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant market. We watched Walt every Sunday, Wonderful World of Disney. And a lot of people were like, black people, that's not my experience. So that's when they started doing the family reunion theme, right? You got to understand different cultures value things differently. And you can miss out if you don't understand the different markets, because they're consumers, but one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah, that's a great example. That's an awesome example. So let me ask you, did I miss anything? Is there any other message that in regards to our subject today that I've maybe missed touching on? And then how would folks get in touch with you if they wanted to use you to help them with their DE and I training?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, it's we're evolving, right? I think there was some motion. It slowed down a little bit. Then I think the George Floyd tragedy kind of made people say, "Whoa, we really aren't post-racial. There's still a lot of work that we need to do." Of And so I would just say be open, right? If you really want to maximize your workforce and get the best out of everybody, also attracting people. I mean, you cannot just attract talent now just because you're a big company, right? And I did a thing with the Gen Z. The Gen Z generation, these are the folk that have been out there marching. They are used to inclusion, and they don't want to work for a company that they don't think is equitable. So it
Mhm.
really can impact that. So you can get in touch with me by emailing me at Deloria Nelson at ACE solutionsgroup.com. You could also just Google my name, Deloria Nelson, or look for ACE Solutions Group. And I will be more than happy to put together a session for you, customize it. But we just need to maximize the workforce, let everybody come together, use their God-given talent, and make the best product possible. So, I mean, I think we're moving in the right direction. It's not easy, but it's how we have to evolve. It's like either evolve or go extinct. We need to evolve our companies, involve, and evolve opportunities for everybody, and just, be the best that we can be. So I'm excited about the opportunities.
Folks, I will have all that information in the show notes below. I'm also going to have a link to Deloria Nelson Streete's original interview where we talked about the book that she wrote, which let's just give a plug for the book.
Sure.
It was from six figures to food stamps back to six figures. And it was about your life. And
absolutely.
it's a quick read, it's a short read, but there are lessons in that book, and it's powerful. It's really
Chuck,
really
that
awesome
makes me
stuff.
smile. All right. Hopefully you all learned a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I look forward to hearing from everybody.
All right, folks, thank you. And until then, until next time, stay safe out there.